Hello everyone, welcome back to my channel. My name is JJ and I'm a writer, a reader, and general lover of stories. Today, I really want to talk about Crime 101. So, if you have been following the crime fiction genre for a while, like I have, you'll know that there are certain things that people love, right? There are certain tropes, there are certain movies, there are certain character types, there are certain pacing patterns, styles of writing, and you'll notice that there are certain storylines that are more prevalent in film than they are in books. And that's what Crime 101 brings to the table in a different way because Crime 101 is a novella adaptation from Don Winslow. So the book, the novella, Crime 101, originally existed as a short piece of fiction, shorter than a novel, which is why it's a novella, but it's a short read and it follows a criminal committing crimes. At the same time, we also have the different pieces of a typical crime fiction storyline, right? We always have the detective, we have somebody trying to hunt them down, we have somebody trying to stop them. And in this particular combination, at least in the movie, we're going to talk about the movie today. I have not read the book. I might. I was looking it up on Goodreads, and a lot of the reviews were kind of lackluster, and I think I know why. Right? First, let's get right into it. I am going to talk about this with as few spoilers as possible, but I can't talk about the plot and how the writing works in the movie and how the pacing works without spoiling things. And I intend to do so. So if you haven't seen this yet and you would like to see it, maybe come back and watch this after you've already seen it. But if you don't care, then stick around because I'm going to do my best to kind of be vague so that if you've seen it, you know what I'm talking about. And if you haven't seen it, then you don't. But I can't talk about the story without first giving things away. So that has to be part of this discussion. Unfortunately, I don't know yet how to avoid spoilers while helping you break down plots because that's part of what we do here. I look at stories from a writer's perspective and I say, here's what worked in the writing. I do this for two reasons. Reason number one, as a writer, one of the best ways that you can get better at writing is to study other people's work. It's inevitable. You have to study what other people are doing. Number two, as a reader, I'm always very curious how certain pacing or how certain plot points or how certain styles of writing effectively make me feel a certain way, right? How did what this author did hook my attention, hook the intrigue, hook anything else about me as a person? How did that all work to lead to the experience that I had as the audience, whether that's in a book or in a movie? So that's part of why I break things down like this, is both to learn from them as a writer myself and to help you understand how we break things down so that we can study them. But also, as a reader, I'm just always curious about kind of the psychology behind why something hit. And I hesitate to use the word psychology because this is more of a writing analysis than it is an actual study of the human brain. But I think that the idea applies, even if it's not exactly the right word. So we're going to go with that. Let's get right into it. Without further ado, there are probably spoilers ahead, so this is your warning. If you want to go see this, stop this video right now and come back after you've actually seen the film. Okay, first, we all need to be on the same page about the characters. So, I have my notes, and we're going to dive into kind of what these characters are, who they are, what tropes they fill, and why that's important for the genre. Okay, so let's talk about the tropes as they relate to the characters, because in crime fiction especially, there aren't a lot of situational tropes so much as there are character focused tropes. And what I mean by that is that, like, in romance, oftentimes you'll get one of the most common well-known tropes in romance is they go to a hotel and, oh no, there's only one bed. What are they gonna do? Is the couple that we are shipping, are they gonna share the bed together? Is one of them going to sleep on the floor? Who's going to sleep on the floor? Is somebody going to say, no, actually, you get the room, I'm going to go sleep in the car? How are they going to do that? Are they going to, take it to the next level if they do share the bed? Or are they going to be disappointed because that didn't happen? All of that is a trope because there's only one bed. That's the trope. That's a situational trope. In crime fiction, suspense, thriller, etc., we get mostly character-based tropes, okay? Those character-based tropes are like this type of character that then gets plopped into whatever plot. Because most of the time in crime fiction, the plot is the same. This is what happens when you have genre fiction, right? So within genre fiction, the plot itself is extremely rhythmic. We know exactly, like when you, the two biggest types of genre fiction are romances and mysteries. In these two, you know exactly what you're getting into. In a romance, you know that you're going to follow this couple as they date. A lot of things are going to get in the way. At the end, if it's a good romance, they get together. Yay! All sunshine and rainbows. This is why we love Hallmark Christmas movies, because we know exactly what's going to happen and we are craving that sweet story with a predictable ending. That's what we want from romance. We know somebody's likely to die because it's probably a murder mystery. We know that somebody is going to investigate, professional or amateur. Ideally, there's going to be some sort of cat and mouse chase. You know, there's going to be some red herrings. People are going to go down the wrong path. We're not going to quite know who we're supposed to trust. And then in the end, the bad guy gets caught and they get shipped off to a prison somewhere, which is not always the realistic way that that goes down. We don't have the evidence to hold them, and do we actually have the evidence to nail them? And there's a lot more that happens in the justice system beyond detective catches supposed killer, because you still have to prove it, and then you still have to prove it to a jury, which is even harder necessarily than proving it to a detective. So, all that to say, those are some of the differences between those two genre fictions, right? And if we are looking at Crime 101 through the lens of specifically the film, I'm not talking about the book because I haven't read the book, I'm looking at the film. If we're looking at this story and these characters through the lens of what trope do these people fit, we'll find why this movie feels both familiar and both original at the same time. And here's why. Every single character falls into a trope. Trope number one, criminal with a code. Now, this is one of my personal favorite tropes. I love a criminal with a code. I love it. And here's why. Because people who live under the law do not get to express their passion to the same degree that somebody who lives outside of the law might get to express his passion, right? And what we see in this is the desire for a criminal to say, well, I might be doing bad things, but I'm not a bad person. This actually ties into the book that I'm reading right now, which I think is a really cool tie-in. The book that I'm reading right now is Safecracker by Jessie DeRoy. And in this book, there's a page where there's a lot of really amazing things, and I will do an entire video on Safecracker eventually. But one of my favorite things about this book is that it does flashbacks in exactly the right way. If you want to learn how to write a flashback and when to write a flashback, read this book. You learn what the character wants you to learn at the time that you need to know it. That is amazing storytelling, and it is ideal. We have all of this information available at our fingertips, but we only get it when the character is actually going to reveal it to us. We are so deeply in his story, it's almost as if he's sitting across the table from us, telling us his story in real time. And every once in a while, he says, you know what, you need some backstory. Here's the backstory that is relevant to what I'm telling you right now so that you're still on my side. And I really love this version of storytelling. But I bring this up because in this book, the character has a moment where he says, I am a good brother, I am a good thief, I am a good son, but I am not a good person. And I think that's one of the things that is most interesting to me, most compelling to me about this character. He knows he's a bad person. He knows he breaks the law. He knows he enjoys it. He knows he's good at that. He knows that he will hurt whoever he has to hurt in order to get what he wants, and he is fine living in that reality. And the big difference is that even though he knows all of this, he also cares deeply about the people in his life. He knows that he's not a good person. He's not the kind of person that you should trust, although he is a good friend, right? He's not going to screw you over if you've been good to him, but he might screw you over if you're working a job together, because that's kind of the first rule of anything, is you do what you have been paid to do and you walk away if you're able to, right? That's how, at least in this particular storyline, that the characters think. And it's oftentimes how criminals think. And that's part of, he's a criminal with a code. He's not going to hurt his family. He's not going to hurt his friends. He is going to do whatever it takes to take care of his sister, who happens to be in a coma, and he doesn't care who he hurts in the process. Okay? Now, contrast this to our criminal with a code in Crime 101. His code is what ends up getting him caught. And I really love that. He cannot help but to act within this code, and that is the thing that makes professional criminals so interesting to me. Because most of the time, professional criminals set up their own set of rules because it's what keeps them from getting caught. And in this particular twist on this trope, his code is what gets him caught in the end. And that's really cool to me. I really love that particular twist. So we have a character with, or a criminal with a code. This is Mike. Some people call him Jason. I'm gonna call him both because he goes by both. And when you first meet him, he says that his name is Mike, and then later you find out that his name is Jason. Next, we have the down on his luck cop. That is a trope. You have cops who are, they need to catch a win, they need to solve a big case, whatever it may be. This particular cop is down on his luck and desperate. And that is a really interesting dilemma, because he's also, that applies to the entire precinct in this movie. The cops are having a really bad time in the press. And what that means is that we have a bunch of people who don't like or trust the police. And we can see exactly why, because there are multiple instances of police abuse of resources. I guess we'll put it that way. We have what people refer to as the thin blue line of choosing other cops above truth necessarily, or supporting other cops no matter what they have done, standing together no matter what, right? So we have instances of that, and we have instances of lack of justice being served because of that. We also have really complicated scenarios with police involved shootings, where the police could lose he could lose his job if it came out that the guy wasn't armed, and it seems like they manipulate evidence on the scene to make it look a certain way to make sure that he could keep his job, and that leads to a bunch of tension later on. But that is the trope, down on his luck cop. And so we see this in the form of Lou. Lou is played by Mark Ruffalo, and he is lovable, probably should aim toward retirement, and not the kind of detective that you expect in this high class type of society. Everybody else in this society is rich, famous, or secretly rich. And then there's Lou driving his beat up junker car and getting kicked out by his wife. There's all sorts of things about his character where he needs a break and he's not getting one. And that makes him a little bit desperate and makes him willing to do things that he might not otherwise do. But it also puts him in exactly the right position to be our moral high ground type of character, where he does get the moral high ground because he's a good person, he's on the right side of the law, and he cares, even though he's getting just a bunch of bad break after bad break after bad break. Okay. Next up, we have our insurance broker. Now, what is her trope? That's the problem with this character. She actually doesn't have a trope that I could identify. She is a relatively flat character. Her biggest drive is to make partner in this insurance firm that she's been working at for 11 years. Some of her coworkers, her male coworkers specifically, have started 6 years after her and are already partners. So there's a lot of debate in this movie. There's a lot of discussion whenever she's on the screen of what is her right, having done her time in the company? Where should she be? When is that actually going to happen? Is it ever going to happen? And all of that leads up to the eventual tipping point for everybody involved. But what we see here also is, and I wish we had a little bit more character for her, because all we get from her is she can't sleep. Like every time, it's humorous. She has an Apple Watch that tracks her sleep in the movie. Every time she wakes up, her sleep score is worse than it was the last time we saw her wake up. She can't sleep. She does yoga. She tries to land rich clients, but nothing is going in her favor. And that's kind of the extent of her characterization, which is kind of sad. She falls rather flat. And this is the biggest critique. Neither of the main female characters have much actual depth. They exist as, in some cases, eye candy and plot progression. They don't actually exist as real people in the plot, right? And that's the hard part about this film. I'm sure the book too, but I haven't read it. But according to the reviews that I read, which is why I decided I probably won't read it, it was originally released in 2021, which is a tricky part of the conversation, right? This is one of the routine parts of conversation where we see men writing women, and especially in the genre fictions, women have been characterized as a very specific flat cardboard piece that moves and acts in specific ways the whole time. And so while there is discussion of women being treated fairly in the workplace, the characterization of that woman is just simply not really there. I couldn't even remember her name when I was doing these notes. And that says a lot about how she was written. This is making me sad, so we're going to move on. Next up, let's see, we've talked about Mike, we've talked about Lou, we've talked about Sharon. Sharon is her name, by the way. I don't know if I said it, but her name is Sharon. Next, we're going to talk about Maya. Maya is the love interest. Maya quite literally runs into Mike in a very tropey kind of rom-com way. They bump into each other on the road, and then they start dating, which there's all sorts of things about that scenario that are really bad life advice. Probably don't go on a date with somebody who hits your car. Okay, we're just don't do it. Also, maybe don't go on a date with somebody who wants to pay you off in cash to avoid having the police involved after you hit their car. There's some bad life choices being made here. She is the love interest, and he is the stranger with a mysterious past. That is a really fun trope. We see that trope often. Novelist John Gardner used to say, there are only two types of plots. You go on a journey, or a stranger comes to town. That's it. Those are the only two plots. And he's kind of right. You can pretty much put every story into one of those two camps. And in this particular instance, the trope of a mysterious stranger or a stranger coming to town is what we see with this romance subplot between Maya and Mike. That is also a trope, right? She is infatuated, he is infatuated, he's looking for human connection. Maya's character serves a symbolic purpose in this plot, and I'm going to get to that in a little bit. But that whole relationship is a trope of mysterious stranger, cute little rom-com in the midst of this thriller, this action thriller. So that's there. And then lastly, the last trope I want to talk about is the nameless criminal underworld, where in the criminal underworld, people either go by weird nicknames or they simply don't have a name at all. So there is a fence that Mike uses to move the product that he steals, right? Whether that's money, whether that's jewels, whether it's high-end like watches or whatever. He brings them to a contact in a seedy underworld kind of spot who, how do you even describe that space other than seedy underworld kind of spot? If you watch the movie, you'll know what I mean, right? They have a routine meeting place in this open air market where nobody ever talks to each other. and then they sit down and they do an exchange. They have a very minimal actual interaction, and then they go from there. This guy is never named in the plot of the movie. This character has no name. I had to find out his name by Googling the cast of the characters. Apparently, in the book, he's referred to as Money, which I think is also a very symbolic name. But this whole idea of a nameless criminal underworld where you all know who this guy is, you all take orders from him, even you get jobs from him, he gives you your next assignment because he's, organizing who's going where, who's doing what, how are we keeping all of these crimes free and off the radar, right? And I think that's a really interesting plot to explore as well. But I kind of love that it's in this film. It's very tropey, but it does it really well for the most part. Again, where the women are concerned, it's a little bit more iffy. But they serve symbolic purposes, and at least they do bring up conversations. That's not an excuse for having them be caricatures or cardboard cutout, essentially. Anyway, those are the tropes. And I think it's interesting to see so many tropes all in one film, because this film is not very long. It's an average length for a film nowadays. But to have that many pieces kind of flowing into each other and around each other and interacting all in the same overlapping plot is a very fun thing that I also personally love to explore in my writing. I love the fact that in crime fiction, total strangers become all looped up into one crime. And that is super interesting to me. And I really enjoy thinking about that. And in this particular story, the way that they set it up, even the visual storytelling of how and when the first crime takes place, Sharon is on the road going into work when Mike is committing his first crime of the movie, right? Like Lou and Sharon pass each other on their commutes. And then eventually they cross paths and they actually meet up. But they cross paths and we see them share a camera shot, which is a super interesting way to establish all of these people are in the same physical space, even if they don't know each other yet. So that was really cool visual storytelling. The other thing that was really cool visually in this film is the billboards. And I really want to go through like piece by piece because it's streaming now and screenshot all of the billboards that are in view in the storytelling of this, because everyone that I saw that I made note of had something to do with the plot at the time. And I think that's a really cool way to incorporate the things on the screen with the plot that's happening. And as a writer, I'm not always very good at envisioning the whole scene. So that was a really cool piece of storytelling that was in this movie and that I really appreciate. Okay, now we're going to talk about the 12 beats as it relates to this particular story. If you've been around my channel before, you know that this is how I outline my novels. I use the 12 beats of storytelling to outline my stories, that I have the whole plot in a quick little snapshot, and if it modifies in the details, I don't get too stuck, right? But I have the overarching, here's what's going to happen and when, laid out in my mind. I get bored if I know the story from start to finish and I stop writing something, so I'm not a detailed liner. You might be. I know a lot of people who write a super detailed outline and then go back through and then say, okay, this is the scene that's happening. This is exactly what purpose the scene serves. And then they write the scene. And then they can write their entire book out of order and it will always work because they know exactly what's happening in different scenes because of their outline. I am not one of those people, but it is important to me that you know that every single plot, and like they exist, they've been named like this because they do show up in every single plot in every single movie that exists, will always be present no matter what. So with that in mind, let's look at the beats of screenwriting, the 12 beats of story, as they relate to Crime 101, the film. And again, I have my notes, which is why I'm looking down, but I have my notes because I didn't want to miss something or get it wrong. So the beats are, and I will probably do an entire video on what these are and how they work, later. But for right now, the beats. We start with a quick little overview because I don't want you to be confused. This is essentially the 3-act structure broken down into more pieces. So if you're familiar with the 3-act structure of exposition, overarching plot, conclusion, that's essentially what this is, but it breaks it up even just a little bit more, and you can identify it for every single film. Once you know what these are, you'll be able to see it in everything. Okay, here we go. Opening image. This is the very first thing that your reader or your viewer will see and sets the tone, sets the mood, introduces the setting, all of that. It introduces what your person should expect, what your audience should expect from what you are creating. The opening image for Crime 101 is the city at night with a focus on the 101 highway and the yoga narration podcast that a couple of the characters listen to of a mindfulness centering kind of thing. That's how this thriller opens. Intense music, calm voice, city skyline at night, focusing in on the 101, which is a wild choice for a thriller. They could have started it in so many other ways, but I really actually really appreciate that they started it in that through line because it does set the tone. This narrator shows up other times, and oftentimes those narrations correlate to whatever's on the billboards as a visual reminder of what you heard in terms of the characters and what the characters are thinking. It's a really cool way to put their mindset audibly into the film. Anyway, so that's the opening image, which is a wild choice for a thriller, but I can't be mad. The theme is also stated in that voiceover. The theme of the movie, in terms of you are right where you need to be, take a moment to breathe and experience this moment as you are. That is the theme of the movie. And that's the biggest thing that our main character has to learn, right? Mike has to learn that actually he already has everything he needs. He has more than enough for what he wants out of his life. He just has to be willing to let it go. And right now, he's not willing to let it go. The setup. This is what most people would call the exposition. The biggest advice that you will ever receive is to jump right into the action. Don't linger too much into the exposition early on. You can always come back and explain later with flashbacks or feedback or other things like that. But this is why mysteries always start with a murder, right? We have to start with the action. And this is the difference between a cozy mystery and a like traditional mystery. The mystery is actually the B plot most of the time. And that's part of what makes it cozy versus anything else. A cozy mystery is just like, here's a story, a sweet story, where a murder happens and then our sleuth investigates. Whereas like a hard-boiled detective mystery is going to follow a crime and then the solving of the crime, which is a very different type of storytelling. Thrillers, on the other hand, focus in on like, here's a big life-changing event, or something like this where it's like happening specifically like citywide, because this is still a thriller. It's a crime fiction thriller as opposed to like a spy thriller, but it's still a thriller. And you have this event that's impacting the entire city, and as you go through that event, you get all of the people that it's impacting and all of the ways that it's impacting them. Anyway, much larger scale kind of thing, usually a little bit more high action, high intrigue, higher stakes. So, the setup for Crime 101 is the first heist. It's the first crime. We see, so immediately after that opening image, where we have this highway, we have the characters kind of crossing each other, we have their morning routines, which one of them, their morning routine is getting ready for a very early morning robbery and removing DNA evidence from his own body, prepping his cars, etc. That sets the scene for the whole movie. That sets the tone. That tells us everything we need to know, actually, about this character. We know he's a professional. We know he runs things like clockwork. We know he's really skilled. He's really smart. But we also see his code at play. He will scare somebody. He will shout at somebody. He will kidnap somebody. He will threaten somebody and their family. but when it actually comes down to it, he won't hurt them. And that is the biggest difference between Mike and the other characters, the other criminals that we see in this film. Now, the next step in these beats is the debate. This is really where your character has to decide whether or not they will take part in the plot. This is when they have to choose of their own free will to be involved in the changing of their lives, the changing of their mind, whatever it may be. And for him, for this story, the debate happens after the first crime when James is talking with Money. He hands over the diamonds, they make the exchange, and Money starts saying, well, hey, you have this other job that you were going to do. And James says, I don't think it's the right time. I don't think we should do this. That is the debate where he is starting to realize, I don't think this is the life I want to live for the rest of my life. And I'm definitely not willing to go to your extremes to do this job. That's the debate. And then we move into the catalyst. Catalyst happens before debate. The catalyst is James's brush with death. So while he's on the job, he had everything organized, he had everything planned, he had everything perfectly laid out. He took all of their weapons, or so he thought. He did not get all of their weapons, which also raises suspense. He did not get all of their weapons, and one of the people he's stealing from points a gun at his head. Fires, misses. Ruins everything, though, because now we have DNA evidence that can link him to the scene because he does bleed. But he doesn't die. And that brush with death is the thing that leads him to the debate where he says, I don't know if this is worth it, actually. I almost died. I almost lost everything. Is that actually worth it? Do I want to keep doing this? And as he brings that up with Money, Money says, well, hey, I mean, you already have this job planned. You should do it. It's a good job. And he's like, I don't think so. It doesn't feel right. I don't want to do it if it's going to end like that, if I'm going to die. Those are the thoughts that are happening in his head. I don't know that he says all of those out loud, but that's how I interpret it. So that's the catalyst, and then the debate is them discussing, and then we enter into the B plot. And the B plot follows Sharon. And this is actually, the pacing and the flow of this story is a really good study in how your B plot and your A plot should connect, how they should overlap, when they should overlap, what that looks like, what that means, right? So the B plot for this film is Sharon, the insurance stuff, and whether or not she will make partner. That is the B plot, which is kind of crazy. We also get a little bit of a B plot, but it ties into the A plot of Lou trying to catch the 101 robber, as they refer to him. Trying to even convince the rest of the precinct that there is a 101 robber. He has to find the pattern, he has to be convinced, and he's determined that he has to bring everybody else on board, and nobody else is going to be on board. So that's still related to the A plot. The insurance stuff, that's all B plot, that's all Sharon. Next up, fun and games, otherwise known as the promise of the premise. And I actually really like the term fun and games more than the promise of the premise, because the promise of the premise is a indicator of what their life could be if everything works out, right? Whereas fun and games is a little bit more like, just let your characters play. So from a writing perspective, I like the phrase fun and games more than I like the phrase the promise of the premise. I think the promise of the premise gets a little too heady for me, but it is a good indicator in this one of what it's supposed to do. So you'll hear those two terms interchangeably. Really, when your characters should be experiencing the whole thing of what would happen if their plans worked out. If everything went according to plan, this is what their life would look like. And in this particular film, the promise of the premise is Mike and Maya going on dates, having nights together, getting to know each other, and really, truly, Mike living a normal life. That is the promise of the premise. It shows up through his romantic subplot with Maya, but that's the plot point itself, is the fun and games. This is what it would look like if Mike could leave a life of crime. And it's brilliant. It's beautiful. It's wonderful. You can see exactly why he starts to do the things that he's going to do later on in the movie. You can see how much he wants it because he gets a taste of it, and he gets a taste of it without money looming over his shoulder, which is also important for him. Midpoint. Now, the midpoint is when everything is either going the best that it has ever been for our characters, or it is the worst that it has ever been for our characters. And in this movie, the different characters have different types of midpoints. Mike, his midpoint is great. It's phenomenal. He's top of the world with Maya. He's out on a lovely date. It's working out. He has a girlfriend. All is well. For Lou, the midpoint is, I mentioned earlier that there were sequences of questionable cop actions. We'll put it that way. Lou gets into a debate with the rest of the precinct of what he saw, what he witnessed versus what everybody else is saying. He gets suspended because everything is under review. That is the worst possible thing that could happen to him. Sharon has been aiming for this high-level position in her company, and she's just heard the news that it is never going to happen. So now Lou and Sharon are at the lowest low that they've ever been, and Mike is at the highest high that he's ever been. And all of this comes crashing down when the bad guy closes in. Like, this is one of my favorite things about thrillers, is that we can follow the antagonist as much as we follow the protagonists. And in this scenario, the antagonist, again, I actually don't know if his name is ever mentioned. I'm going to call him Motorcycle Guy. Motorcycle Guy is the worst. I hate him, and I'm supposed to, so I don't feel bad saying that. He is designed as the worst possible person you've ever seen. He's also an amateur and incompetent, but he's incompetent in the most dangerous of ways. And he is the bad guy closing in on Mike and Mike's happiness because he works for money. I love this part of the plot, mostly because it tells us what we need to know to create situational drama, situational intensity, which raises the suspense and raises the tension. So we see, as the viewer, we see Motorcycle Guy having his meeting with money, getting the new job of, hey, go do this job that Mike turned down, and also steal his next job from him, right? We know he has contacts. Go follow him until he reveals his contacts and then steal whatever you need to from them. That is Motorcycle Guy's only job, to mess up what Mike is going to do. That's it. That's like legitimately his only role. But in that, he is the worst possible person. Money never actually gets his hands dirty. He just sends other people to do his dirty work. Motorcycle Guy gets his hands very dirty, and I hate him for it. But again, I'm supposed to, so it's good writing. He's just the kind of character that makes you feel slimy, right? And this is the bad guy closes in. What we see here is that Motorcycle Guy starts stalking James. He starts stalking Sharon, and he starts interacting and tweaking and manipulating James's world. Okay? James, Mike, same guy. Bad guy closes in. We are in one of my favorite parts of the whole plot. And it's where the lines start crossing, where people start converging. And it's where Motorcycle Guy starts interacting with James's life. Because like I said, his whole goal is to just like make his plans fall apart. And so we see this in a lot of different ways. We see him following James around, we see him stealing his intel, we see him threatening the people that he's talked to. And we see James and Motorcycle Guy get into this crazy car chase. Now, this was set up early on with foreshadowing. At the end of the very first heist, we see James in a crazy car chase as he makes a ridiculous escape from the whole scenario because a gunshot was fired. So he's like, time for me to leave. Goodbye, cruel world. You're armed. I gotta go. And so he like zips out and vanishes. He just totally vanishes. And that's a cool, I love that trope too, where people can just like disappear into thin air. As in a crime fiction world, that is a really sweet trope to play with. This one does it really well. Leverage, they do it too, where they just vanish. And I love that. But we see this even more in this movie because now we see this car chase. We see his actual crazy driving capabilities in the car chase as he's driving on the wrong side of the street. I mean, I can't believe that this is where, suspension of disbelief. The cops absolutely would have been there in this ridiculous, in all of these traffic violations. Somebody would have called the police. But we're going to suspend the disbelief. We're going to move on. We're focusing in on the fact that the bad guy and the good guy are crossing paths for the first time. And what we see in this car chase is that not only is Motorcycle Guy an amateur and reckless and dumb, but we also see that Mike is a professional and smart. And even when it looks like he might lose, he is the one that comes out on top. And it sets up that power dynamic. It sets up as Stephen James usually says, everything has to do with status. A lot of the tension in a scene comes from somebody claiming status that isn't theirs, or somebody enforcing a status on somebody else, right? And what we see in this dynamic is James exemplifying why his status is higher, why he is the one that money goes to for crimes than Motorcycle Guy, right? We can see exactly why Motorcycle Guy is the amateur that he is, and it's because he's reckless and stupid and dumb. So, and also nobody likes him, and you're not supposed to because that's how he is created to be, right? Good writing. It's good writing when you can fully hate a character because it means that the author let the character be an absolutely horrible human being. In this sequence, we also see the very first time in the movie when Mike/James's code starts to crumble. He doesn't hurt people. He doesn't. He will scare them, he will threaten them, he will do all sorts of things, but he does not hurt his victims. He has no problem hurting Motorcycle Guy. Because when he actually finds him, he knows that Motorcycle Guy is probably there, possibly to kill him. He is there possibly as a hitman. And so it's partially self-defense, but it's also very much you gotta back off, right? Like, I am the superior criminal in this scenario, and you must do what I tell you to do. And when I say that I never want to see you again, I need you to understand that that is a more important requirement than whatever money is going to tell you to do. And that tension is crazy because that's also the very first time that we see Mike pull a gun in a way that he might actually use it. Most of the time he's bluffing, and he's a very good bluffer. It feels very legitimate. So when we see him pull a gun on Motorcycle Guy, there's the tension of, oh my gosh, is he actually gonna hurt this man? Because he's already punched him, he's already thrown him across the room, he's already chased him down until Motorcycle Guy hit a different car and does a crazy flip and miraculously walks away from it. This is the crazy thing about the bad guy closes in. Now they're crossing paths, now they're interacting, but they both walk away from it, right? Mike, being the better of the two people, being the bigger man, if you will, says, hey, I'm not going to stoop to your level, so you better back off before I do what I would do if I had to make you stop. Motorcycle Guy is just trying to prove himself, and I think that's part of the interesting tension of this whole dynamic. Next, all is lost, which also falls right into that. So they've had they have their big car chase, and then they interact, and that all is lost moment for Mike is when he has to debate whether or not to end things right then and there and kill Motorcycle Guy. Eventually he chooses not to, but it does put a perspective into his mind of everything that I love and everything that I care about in this world can be taken away because money has it out for me. He knows that it's not Motorcycle Guy doing his own thing. He knows that. It's money pulling the strings, but he also is realizing how fragile that makes him, how fragile that makes the whole scenario and everything he's worked for, which is also tricky. Then we get into the dark night of the soul. This is, for him, he realizes that he can't walk both worlds. He realizes that if he's going to do this big job that he has plans to do the walk away money kind of job, he has to say goodbye to Maya. He has to tell her, hey, I have to leave town for a little bit. I don't know when I'll come back. And she eventually says, you know what? Screw this. I've tried to be patient, but, and I love this for her actually. This is one of the times when she's the most real as a character. And she says, you haven't given me anything about yourself. I don't know you at all. Why would I wait for somebody that I don't know? And I do appreciate that for her and the fact that she walks away. But now he's free to do whatever he's going to do, whatever crimes he's going to do, and he has to pull himself together in time to do that. The other thing that we see is that in this particular storyline, the Dark Night of the Soul converges for Lou, for Sharon, and for Mike. They all converge at the same time. Okay? We see all of their stories come to a head at the same moment, which I think is really interesting storytelling. So for Lou, the Dark Night of the Soul is nobody believes me. My wife just kicked me out. I have a new apartment now because I have no other choice. And my department thinks that I'm insane. For Sharon, we see I am never going to make that partner position. And this guy approached me offering to steal from my clients to make my insurance company pay. So, like, the clients wouldn't, I mean, that's why insurance exists. The clients wouldn't actually be impacted by the theft, other than emotionally if there's any sentimental value. But the insurance company that she works for, she has a moment, a dark night of the soul is that moment when you say, maybe it's worth it to just take the easy route and say, screw it, and burn every bridge that you know. And for her, that means posting an Instagram photo of the beach, because that was the requirement for Mike to find out that she's ready to do this job, right? She's ready to be the inside man. She's ready to help with that in a walk away kind of money, right? Kind of job. And then for Mike, we see this all converge in terms of a I will never be free of this life, which is, you know, the life that I want to live in order to be with Maya. I can never have that if I'm still looking for more and more and more and more and more. So maybe a walk away money kind of job is the answer to that problem, and then I can have that life with Maya. And this Dark Night of the Soul converges for all of them, and I think that's a really interesting storytelling point. And then we get into the break into three, which break into three is the beginning of the third act. So we have all of this setup. The whole thing is leading to this point, the break into three. Break into three then is the beginning of the end. We see, in this case, it's the planning of the big heist. We see it's how the characters all interact. It's the worst thing that Motorcycle Guy can ever do. It's the biggest job of Mike's life and his career, and it is the chance to take down the criminal that Lou has been chasing for all of these years, right? It's all of these things combining into one. Everything has been leading to this point. That is the break into three. And that leads directly into the finale, where all of these characters' paths converge. So in the finale, we have this meticulously planned heist where Mike is going to go pick up the courier from the airport. He's going to drive him because the courier is carrying diamonds and a briefcase full of cash. So he's going to drive him to the wedding suite. The wedding suite then will have even more cash in the safe. So as Sharon put it, there will be $11 million all within the same four walls, just waiting to be taken in an unsecured hotel room. That's pretty crazy and hard to ignore. So Mike does all of these steps to go pick up the courier, take him to the wedding suite, and pull off the con of his life, right? By pretending to be the security that's been hired. Now, we also have Lou, who, after Sharon has an interaction with Motorcycle Guy, Sharon comes to her senses and says, I can't do this. I want out of this. If I go to the police before it happens, maybe, even though it's still conspiracy to commit grand larceny, it's not pulling it off. And maybe I'll get a lighter sentence, or maybe I can avoid consequences for all of this, right? So she goes to Lou because Lou is the only police contact that she knows. And she has a way to contact him without going through official channels. Lou on the other hand, now suspended, is like, well, what else am I going to do with my life? So, of course, I'm going to help you because somebody needs to help this damsel in distress. And he takes her in and helps. And then he takes the place of the courier on the plane. So now we get the tension of two different people pretending to be someone who they are not in the most awkward drive of our lives, right? A lot of this movie actually takes place in cars, and I think that's an interesting thriller trope as well, of the high car chase, money, of the luxury items that could be in this. Antique cars was not something on my bucket list for like things that I would check for, but it is part of what makes this fit into the thriller genre and more of the action genre than like normal thriller, because a lot of action novels are targeted toward male readers, and in that, which isn't to say that women don't care about cars, because women can care about cars and a lot of them do, but in this particular scenario, the intensity of the car chases can kind of lean almost F1 racing kind of vibes, which is much more targeted toward a male audience, which fine, whatever. Do what you got to do, right? But we see in all of these sequences of these characters in their cars, this is maybe the one time that we actually see two characters having a conversation in the car, and both of them are pretending to be somebody that they're not. And I love that trope a lot. Okay, we have two liars stuck in a confined space for an extended period of time, and both trying to not give the other one any information about who they are the whole time. They get to the hotel room, and now they're double crossing each other in a double blind, where Lou has a plan to take down the criminal because he's sure that the criminal will show up. In fact, he probably knows, actually, that the criminal is the one who was driving him. He probably already knows that because he was probably smart and put that together if Mike gave Sharon all of the information. But I don't know that Mike did give Sharon all of the information. In fact, I'm pretty sure he didn't, otherwise Mike would have stopped it all before it even happened. Meanwhile, they get there, and this is the other interesting thing about this, the writing in this finale. In this finale, you are not rooting for the people who are being robbed. You are still rooting for Mike. At least I was, right? My friends who were watching this who maybe are less interested in criminals probably were rooting for Lou, but either way, you're still not rooting for the victims in this robbery, which is a wild way to write the scene. You're not saying, don't hurt that billionaire. You're saying, come on, Mike, get the money, or you're saying, come on, Lou, take Mike down, right? And that is an interesting, I told you earlier on in this very long video that I talk about why the writing impacts you the way that it does and how you come to these conclusions that the writer leads you to. Don Winslow, or whoever wrote the script, but Don Winslow wrote the original, I am positive that he wanted you to sympathize with Mike. Positive. And the reasoning behind that, the reason I say that is because Mike is the kind of person you can root for, and you're supposed to root for him, and he is our protagonist. So, you put Mike in a room with $11 million, and you put the cop who's trying to stop him in the room. The cop is there to increase stakes. He's not necessarily there to stop Mike. Does that make sense? You're still, as the reader or as the viewer, you're still going to root for Mike. At least I did. And then, to make matters worse, because that's always what a finale should do, that's always the next question that a thriller writer should be asking, is what can I do in this particular scene to make things go horribly wrong and back my characters into even more of a corner? That is one of the most fun things about writing thrillers and crime fiction, is that you really do get to force your characters up a tree and then start throwing rocks at them. You're not going to give them a ladder. You're going to start throwing rocks at them, okay? This is how you write good crime fiction. How you do that is up to you, but that's what you're supposed to do because it increases the stakes, it increases whatever is happening. So, of course, whatever can go wrong will go wrong, and it must go wrong to the most degree possible. Otherwise, it doesn't feel like the characters have earned it. So now, to make matters worse, motorcycle guy is there. Finale, right? All paths converge. We don't have Maya, we don't have Sharon. They've counted themselves out of the story. But what we do have is Lou, Mike, and Motorcycle Guy, plus some random bystanders, right? But when we have Lou, Mike, and Motorcycle Guy all in the same room, all of their morals start clashing. We have Lou, who wants to catch the 101 robber. That's his only goal. He wants to catch the 101 robber. Mike, whose only goal right now is to get the final score. It's the last score of his career before he retires from the criminal lifestyle, in theory. And then we have Motorcycle Guy, who's trying to prove himself to money and make a lot of money in the process. And also stop Mike from ever working again. So Motorcycle Guy comes in, ruins Mike's entire plan because that was his goal. That was always going to happen. His whole goal is to stop Mike. And what we see is that Mike has to then make a choice. Mike has to say, when am I actually willing to hurt somebody? And Lou has to make a choice to say, how much is it worth it to me to actually stop a criminal when that criminal is somebody I've come to admire, right? So both Mike and Lou have to figure out where their boundaries can bend, which is a really interesting point of character growth. When you take the thing that you believed as part of your core and it shifts and changes throughout the narrative until finally over here your answer to the same question is different, right? When Mike is now faced with the question of, what do I want out of life and do I have enough to be happy? His answer, when given the chance to walk away, is to walk away. He couldn't do that before. He can do that now. He is confident in who he is and what he has. Lou, on the other hand, now says, you know what? I know who was doing these things. He's actually maybe not that bad of a guy. Like, obviously, he's stealing things and he's hurting people and scaring people, but he's not, like, killing people. And that matters to him. They get the killer. They get the guy who's been actually causing major problems. And this is oftentimes the difference between white-collar crimes and major crimes or homicide, right? Motorcycle Guy was on the route to causing mass destruction, whereas Mike, James, whatever you want to call him, our protagonist, our criminal with a code, he was focused in on white-collar crimes. He was just stealing from people, and mostly stealing from insurance companies. This is what I love white-collar crimes they're so interesting from a writing perspective and from a crime perspective. Even the way that white-collar criminals think is very different than the way that, like, a serial killer thinks. So that is the finale, where you have all of these paths combining, you have all of these people converging, and there's the big question of who is going to actually do their job here, and what does that look like? Who succeeds? What does it look like to succeed in this crazy scenario? And how is this whole thing going to wrap up? And then we get to the final image. This is the conclusion, this is the ending, this is how everything ties together. This is how you give your viewer resolution and enough of a comfort of, okay, yes, everything has been wrapped up. In this final image, we see, it's kind of a sequence of images, but in this final sequence, we see Mike taking some steps to make amends and make things better, which is so interesting from a writing perspective, because we have Mike saying very clearly, I know who I was, and I know who I am now, and I know that I'm not the same person that I used to be. And here's who I want to be, so I'm going to start moving in that direction. We see him saying thank you in the only way he knows how, right? He sends gifts through contacts and still some kind of strange, creepy, criminal kind of ways, right? Like, he's still stuck in his ways in a lot of ways. And on the other hand, we see him slowly making turns toward something different in his life. We see Lou even deciding, you know what, maybe it is time for me to retire and into a quieter life. The way that Mike goes about sending these messages to people, he's essentially creating invitations that they can then act on. He is giving an invitation to Maya when he sends a family photo, a photo of him when he was younger with his brothers, possibly adopted brothers, right? But he sends her a family photo because one of the things that she says is, I know nothing about you. I can't learn about you. How do I know who you are when you won't even let me in, right? How am I supposed to fall in love with you if you won't tell me anything about who you are? And that invitation in the form of, I would like to reconnect with you, I want to let you in, here's information about me, whether or not you want to use it. That is an interesting way to kind of wrap up that storyline. We don't know if we see her leave work early suddenly. We don't know how that interaction goes. It's left up to our interpretation of whether they get together, whether it works out, whether he's actually capable of that kind of connection with somebody after years and years and years of isolation. We also see him give Blue the car that he's always wanted. Blue has been saving up for his dream car for years. It's part of why he drives this like beat up junker. And finally, he gives him the car because he had it in his collection. Mike has a collection of cars. It's one of the ways that he managed his wealth, is to just have assets, right? He gives Lou a car that he's been wanting forever. Sharon gets her cut because Lou pulls off some sleight of hand. So she gets some, we assume she didn't ever go to prison for it because Lou was not acting under the authority of the police. He was suspended. He wasn't supposed to be working, right? So I don't know if he quit. I don't know if he resigned. I don't know what happened there, but so that's kind of a loose end that never got cleaned up. But that's what the finale is supposed to do, is how you tie everything up in a nice little bow. We know what happens to Motorcycle Guy. We don't know what happens to Money, but we can assume that he's just off still running his criminal empire, this time without Motorcycle Guy or Mike. And it wraps everything up in a nice-ish little bow. So, now that we've gone through the entirety of the plot, and I've identified all of these beats, and what works and what doesn't work, and why the tension rises and falls when it does, I want to talk about why this works so well within this genre, right? Why do these tropes make such a difference to the point of, obviously, I can identify the tropes. All a trope is like a repeated theme or idea or sequence, right? So we have this repetitive nature. This whole thing is packed with tropes. And the thing about it is that it works really well for this particular story in this particular genre. Why? Why does it work so well? And a lot of it has to do with the fact that it is crime fiction. It's a heist story. It is focusing in on the dark underbelly of the world that a lot of people would like to pretend it doesn't exist. And that is a really interesting place to kind of focus in on, but it's also the tropes are what make the story feel familiar enough that we're ready to say, yeah, I can get behind Mike stealing these things. I can totally understand how, like, I might not be able to have those contacts or like want to get that information that way, but I can totally understand and see why he does and why he would. So we get that, and that's part of why it works in the genre. The other part of it is that crime stories, like I said, it's genre fiction. We know exactly what's going to happen the whole time. So to have it follow the criminal as much as it follows the detective, because you could easily tell this whole story through Lou's lens the whole time, and you would miss out on some of those character plot points, but you would get them in a different way through Lou, through his investigation, through the people that they ask and interrupt and all that does. So the fact that it is crime fiction, focusing in on the criminals who are doing the acts of committing crimes, as opposed to detective fiction, which is following the investigation, that matters for this particular story. But the tropes and the pacing and the flow, all of it ties together really nicely to make this a really good case study in how to write crime fiction. We talked about a little bit some of the weaknesses already, but one of the questions that I wrote down to discuss is what makes it iffy in today's landscape. And I think the biggest thing that makes it iffy is the way that the women characters are treated. And a lot of that is because there's just simply not a lot of female characters in the story. There are two side character women who are there, they impact the plot, but mostly they exist to prop up what is happening in the men's lives around them. mostly because they were not characterized in a way that allows them to exist in any other form of their own. We see this a lot, this book released in 2021, and we should know better by 2021. We should be doing better. We should be trying harder to make sure that all of our characters have depth and have enough deep characterization that the characters can exist as a full person. And when all we know about somebody is their sleep habits, what podcasts they listen to, and if they like their job, that's not really a character. We know very little about Sharon outside of her own personal ambition, and that ambition is always framed in the same sort of sentence and space as men. So that's one problem when we're looking at Maya. We have to look also at the fact that she only exists as a love interest. There is not much more to her character outside of her affection or her desire or her interest in Mike. And that's just not a well-rounded character. You take her out and she has discussions with him because she's the one who talks on their dates, but it's not very much more than that. And it's always around trying to get him to open up. So that's one of the weaknesses, especially in today's landscape and today's storytelling landscape, that I think, this book is published, the movie has been made. That's one area that they could have done better. The other area that they could have done better is in the language. And I do think it's interesting how the language was used as a way to showcase power dynamics. The only people that I remember seeing, so that doesn't mean that that doesn't mean that this is accurate, right? This is based off of my perception of the whole film. But the people that I remember cursing in this movie are the people who are vying for some sort of power that isn't actually theirs, right? So we see there's a good chance that Mike curses at some point, but I don't remember it. Same thing with Sharon. I think Sharon does curse eventually, but it's maybe once or twice. Lou, he's a cop. It's in the vernacular, but the way that he curses isn't just a power grab, it's a way to process what's happening. Motorcycle guy, on the other hand, about every other word. When he's speaking, most of the time, it is a lot of F this, F that. And the thing that's interesting to me about that is that it actually cheapens his character and makes him be. He gets portrayed in some ways as a whiny adult toddler throwing a temper tantrum. Like that's how the final fight and final showdown goes down with him, is he's fighting so hard for something that isn't his, and he's trying so hard to be somebody that he isn't, to live up to some reputation that doesn't belong to him. And in that, he's doing what he thinks he's supposed to do, and the only ways that he knows to control the situation, which, especially when juxtaposed to Lou and Mike, that is a very strong juxtaposition, because it doesn't have to be that. The other character that we see curse is actually the billionaire who's being stolen from, and it puts him in the same position as our whiny motorcycle guy. So I think that's one of the interesting things. If you can't handle strong cursing, don't go see this movie, because there is a lot of it. And there's also a lot of other adult themes. It's rated R for a reason. But all of that said, I think those are the weak points, but I also think that some of that is done very intentionally in the writing, specifically around how the dialogue is used and what language they use. And I think it is an interesting way to showcase that dichotomy between these characters. My last question that I wanted to discuss is what could make this stronger? And I think some of that we've already discussed. I think there's some of those things about characterization, some explanations. I think I would have loved to see more, just a little bit more wrap up but it's also intentionally left open ended, right? We don't know what happens with Mike and Maya. We don't know if he continues living as Mike. We don't know if he introduces himself by his true name. We don't know if they stay in LA. We don't, there's a lot that we don't know. And that's okay. Open endedness in the crime fiction genre is understandable, normal, expected in some ways because we wrap up the crime and then some guilty parties will always just disappear. That's a normal and expected trope in and of itself. And that's okay, right? I told you that this movie is a collection of tropes and in a good way, in the best way, even. And so to not get the full wrap up that the audience expects is actually not a bad thing. In this particular scenario, it's not a bad thing to not get that full story. But I do think that it could have been helpful to see a little bit more of, did Lou lose his job? What happened when the police got there? What, like, did he have to make any sort of justifications? It feels a little bit like it was rushed at the end, given all of the other components going on, right? Like I said, Lou was suspended. He wasn't supposed to be working that case. He told Mike to get out of town and stay gone, and Mike decided not to, right? So, like, there's things like that where I think, and maybe they're setting up for a new sequel. I doubt it, and I don't really want them to. Some things should be left as standalones, but there's also a good chance that if they were setting it up as a sequel, these are the things that we would want to explore, right? We couldn't get rid of Mike as a criminal because then we wouldn't have franchising power. So there's some things from the business side of things, but from a writer's perspective, I think a lot of this movie was really strong, which is also why I think it's a really good case study in the pacing for crime fiction, when things should happen, how you should foreshadow, how you can foreshadow, and you can go from there. Because there's a lot of, even like I mentioned earlier, the background pieces that are in place to help reinforce the theme of you are in the right place, you are doing what you're supposed to do, you are already enough. That theme throughout the whole movie gets showcased in billboards along with the yoga track, right? And so I think that combo is a really interesting back and forth between the characters. So anyway, those are the things that I think could be done better. Those are the things that make it a little bit iffy in today's landscape. But generally, overall, I think it is a really good movie. It is one of my top movies of the year. Enough that I've seen it twice already and probably will see it again. Yeah. Have you seen it? Do you agree? Do you think I missed some marks? Discuss. Let's discuss. Let's open the conversation and let's discuss in the comments. I look forward to telling you about other crime fiction as it comes out, other things that I'm watching or reading or paying attention to. And if you have any recommendations, I would love to hear from you. Other videos that you might be interested in are popping up on the screen. It helps me a lot if you like and subscribe or share this with a friend who also might be interested in crime fiction, suspense, thriller, writing tips. All of that is what this channel is. I like to discuss all sorts of things in great detail in terms of storytelling, but specifically storytelling within crime and thriller genres. So stick around. If I'd love to have you here. It's really good to see you if you're new. And until next time, I will see you then. Bye.